Did you ever know any grown-ups who got married and then later they got a divorce?
Fred Rogers was, for a very long time, the only grown-up on television talking to children about these things. He wasn't a cartoon. He didn't have superpowers. He didn't establish rapport with his audience by being sarcastic or edgy or hip. Rogers figured out it was enough to be gentle and soft-spoken and polite and sincere and reassuring. Mr. Rogers knew what he was doing, and he did it for 34 years.
He did, yeah.
And he did more good in that time than maybe anyone else on television.
All right, guys, your favorite Gen Z Brit is back again with another Mr. Rogers reaction. The rabbit hole is continuing. What a journey it's been from me knowing nothing to what I know now. Look, I always leave a playlist at the end of the videos if you guys want to see all the reactions I've done in chronological order. I know a lot of you guys have been loving checking out these Mr. Rogers reactions, and I love checking them out because every time I do react to Mr. Rogers, I always end up feeling really just at peace with myself, really uplifted or motivated or inspired, and you know, it's just good stuff for the soul. Of course, guys, I recently checked out Won't You Be My Neighbor, Mr. Rogers' documentary, and I know a lot of you guys wanted to see that. I cannot post that on YouTube, but that is already on the Patreon for those guys that are wondering, alongside all the other videos that I've got on there, such as my other movie reactions. I've got so many now, a lot more sitcom reviews as well as album reviews. And the list is just getting bigger and bigger with all of the things that I've checked out at the moment. So look, if you guys want to get an extra dose of nostalgia as well as a Gen Z perspective on a lot of these classics, then I'll definitely recommend checking out the Patreon, linked in the description below. Of course, like I always say, it would be great to support the channel if you guys want to go above and beyond because you love the content. Of course, going to subscribe to the channel goes a long way. Turn on the post notification so you don't miss some of these bangers. And don't forget to like the video as well. And let me know what other things you guys want me to check out. But look, with that being said, my wonderful people, let's get straight into this video. Let's go. This is a bland reaction, by the way. I do not know what is going to be said.
The tricky thing about appreciating Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood is that you have to see it through the right set of eyes.
It's a beautiful day in this neighborhood.
What kind of eyes is he talking about?
Day for a neighbor. Would you be mine? Could you be mine?
Which I must admit I myself did not possess until very recently. The program launched back in the late 60s, an era with its own TV fashions and faces. I am here! And while I can't honestly say this happened, I can imagine myself back then clicking around the TV dial and coming across this.
Ready now? Gonna hide behind the armor. Here we go.
And then quickly moving on to something else.
These visuals,
thing,
man.
I was 12 years old at that point, and Mr. Rogers was a baby show. For another, we'll switch back again. Maybe I found something just a little...
Wait, was that what he was doing the whole time, switching between channels? I was thinking, what's that sound? Was that the sound of like what TV used to sound like when you switch channels?
I can imagine myself back then clicking around the TV dial and coming across this.
Ready now?
Wow.
Hide behind the
it seems
armor.
like such a
Here we
contrast to the other ones
and
as well.
then quickly moving on to something else. For one thing, I was 12 years old at that point, and Mr. Rogers was a baby show. For another, we'll switch back again. Maybe I found something just a little threatening about a man who was so determinedly gentle and soft-spoken.
Now, look. Oh, you're
It's a big contrast to what was on TV at the time.
When you're 12 and
On cable,
struggling
whatever
to
you
be cool, one thing you know for sure is that a grown man who puts on colored tennis shoes every day and who feeds the fish every day and who, in that goody-goody voice, sings songs about feelings.
I'm proud of you. I hope that you are proud of you too.
He was definitely not cool. Click and goodbye,
Not
Mr.
cool.
Rogers.
How are you? Everything peaceful?
Oh,
in the
not cool as in
neighborhood
for the
today?
age she was in.
Except Mr. Rogers never said goodbye. He stayed around, and times changed, but he did not.
Let's pretend that it's still nighttime.
This is a great narration.
And
so
to those
far.
viewers who had the right set of eyes, and that means anyone who was 3 or 4 or 5 years old in the 1960s, or the 1970s, or the 1980s, or 1990s, to those viewers, Mr. Rogers became important, huge, a permanent memory. One way we saw that was to meet his train when he visited Washington, D.C. last winter.
How are you?
And to see how long it took before he was recognized. About 9 seconds.
Mr. Rogers?
Wow.
Mr. Rogers.
I am.
You were a great influence on me, and you're an influence on my child as well.
I watched her goodbye
Wow.
on TV and it just brought me to tears.
Oh,
Look at the impact he's
These were
having.
completely spontaneous testimonials. And you could see that regardless of how old they are today, 14 or 44, people who grew up watching The Neighborhood
Wow.
hi, Mr. McFeely.
had all known the same Mr. Rogers because he's been doing the same thing, regardless of fashions, TV ratings, or the fact that long, long ago he became a
That
star.
video is a work of art in itself.
That's
Mr.
amazing in
McFeely.
itself. That he's
And
kept
now
it real
comes
for
this
so
news
long.
that Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood has ceased production, and you think, wait a minute, can
Ooh.
this be the end of Mr. Rogers?
Congress.
And if you're one of his lifelong fans, or even a latecomer like me, which had a lot to do with having children who watch him, you realize there will never be anyone quite like him in children's television again. Sure, he's quirky and not cool, but Mr. Rogers knew what he was doing, and he did it for 34 years,
He did, yeah.
and he did more good in that time than maybe anyone else on television.
Like, was watching Mr. Rogers just like not a cool thing to do? Like past the age of like 5 or 6? I don't know. You guys let me know the cultural perspective on that. But yeah, it's easy. It's interesting.
And he did
to
more
see
good in
what this
that
guy's
time
saying.
than maybe anyone else on television.
When
He
I
was
was a
revolutionary.
baby owl, I remember how I used to wish I could fly.
And
I
one of
wanted
the
to fly,
most
you know,
dramatic
right.
examples of that was this episode broadcast in June of 1968. And if the month and year seem vaguely familiar to some,
No.
this is why.
Those of us who loved him
Oh, what?
and who take him to his rest today,
The nation was watching
Pray
the
that
Kennedy
what he was
family
to us,
prepare to bury another
what he wished
brother.
for others.
Bobby Kennedy had just been assassinated.
That's why 68 was.
And here's what happened on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood in a special broadcast for kids and their parents.
Oh, he addressed it, didn't he?
Assassination mean?
That's the
Have you
1968.
heard that word a lot today? Yes.
I've been terribly concerned about the graphic display of violence which the mass media has been showing recently.
He was not afraid to tackle these subjects.
And I plead for your protection and support of your young children.
Damn.
There is just so much that a very young child can take without it being overwhelming.
And if you see what Rogers was getting at that night, the kids need a lot of help in understanding their
Definitely.
world. And you see what he did in less dramatic fashion every single day. All those things that
Every
scared
day.
kids, all those feelings they didn't know what to do with, the confusing things that grown-ups did,
But wartime can be scary time for children.
and the painful things that grown-ups did.
Did you ever know any grown-ups who got married and then later they got a divorce?
Fred Rogers was, for a very long time, the only grown-up on television talking to children about these things. He wasn't a cartoon. He didn't have superpowers. He didn't establish rapport with his audience by being sarcastic or edgy or hip. Rogers figured out it was enough to be gentle and soft-spoken and polite and sincere and reassuring.
No, because honestly speaking, I love the way this commentator just pitched that. Because Mr. Rogers was revolutionary. Because what he was doing at the time was very radical. And he was one of the only people, if not the only person, doing his style of shows, and the way he was slow speaking. He was very authentic. That's not something that was a common from what I've heard back then. Even I remember seeing a clip of women saying, you take what was typically going on, the conventions of, media at that time, and you get Mr. Rogers' show, and you do the complete opposite, then you'll get Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Like, it completely went against what was there. And the fact that he was so comfortable, or he had a sense of duty to address these important real things that would have impacted children was big. Because even nowadays, I can't even think of an example of a show where the host or whatever really gets into these kinds of things, and it's like a kind of a pivotal figure for a lot of children, especially nowadays, man.
All
He
qualities
was
that came to him naturally.
Mr. Rogers
we'll see
single-handedly
when we
saved
return.
so many lives, man,
Fine, thank you. I slept.
with these clips. You can imagine if Mr. Rogers wasn't here, the impact that would
Are
have
you
had.
ever amazed by the fact that this program turned into an institution and that you've become an icon?
Is it just me, or is the commentator also speaking slow? I have a feeling, no, this interviewer, is speaking slow because of the Mr. Rogers effect. That's what I'm coining that right now. Mr. Rogers has an effect where you see how slow he speaks and it just calms you, and it just makes you slow down as well. I don't know how, it's just it's definitely something psychological behind that.
The fact that this program turned into an institution and that you've become an icon.
The sages throughout the years have talked essentially about the same thing. And one is, you don't set out to be rich or famous. What you set out to do is to be helpful. If the other comes along with it, that's okay, but that's not what you set out to be.
I love
Rich?
that. That's
Not
exactly what he
rich.
did.
Famous? Well, it's more like Mr. Rogers is quietly powerful, as we saw when we continued to follow him around Washington. This was the PBS conference that had brought him to town. And watch how virtually everywhere he went, there were people stopping him and telling him that he had been there for them at just the right moment in their lives when they really needed a neighbor.
That's amazing.
I want to thank you very much.
On my own behalf and behalf of my adult children, thank you for what you've given to us.
Wow,
When I was a little
generations.
girl, there were many confusing messages about white and black and who belonged where, but we knew we belonged with you.
Thank you for
That's
that.
Thank you so much.
And he had that pool scene as well, where he had Officer Clemens get in the pool with him, which would have definitely been a culture shock, or like a radical move, political move at the time as well, to allow, you know, someone who's black and a white person mixing races in the same swimming pool, because it wasn't illegal at a point. Crazy.
We belonged with you.
And she seems mixed race as well, so I can imagine having probably a white parent, white and a black parent.
Thank you so much.
Your life reminded me of what it
That
must
would
be
have
like to be
impact.
the leader in a marathon.
Had a big impact on her.
In that,
probably.
at every step of the way, people were reacting to you and clapping for you and applauding you. To watch so many people walk up to you and all of them saying two words, thank you, over and over. It was thank you. What are they all thanking you for?
That's
You
a good
know, I
question.
think that people long to be in touch with honesty. And I wonder if they're not thanking us for just giving ourselves. And I think that people sense that we want to be honest with them. You know, I've told children, and many of these people grew up with the neighborhood. They were children when we started, and now they have children of their own. And many of them know that I would say, this might hurt. You know, if you go to the doctor and the doctor gives you an injection, it might hurt at first, but it won't hurt long. I mean, we're not going to fudge stuff. We're going to tell them the truth, and we're not going to dance around and say how happy things are when they're not. And I have a feeling that that's part of the thank you.
The other thing Fred Rogers never did was to treat...
We don't even get a lot of the truth nowadays. You know, the people are becoming more aware of, even us Gen Zers are becoming way more aware of how the media can influence media, and how you shouldn't believe everything that you're told or that you see. At least have a critical eye with things and not just nod your head and mindlessly believe everything. I definitely think there's been a cultural shift in the last couple of years, especially when people are now starting to like pay attention to and notice just how much like the propaganda can just get propagated, and false stories and narratives just can spread so easily if people are just mindlessly like watching and nodding their heads to things. So that
the other thing
that
Fred
just hits a lot
Rogers
harder nowadays. What
never
Mr.
did
Rogers
was to
said.
treat children as a marketing opportunity. You could go back to the 1950s, and children's programming never missed that opportunity. Even the venerable Captain Kangaroo.
Buster Brown shoes. Shoes with real grown-up styles that fit your feet the best of any. Say, look.
Why is there a clock in the middle like that?
So glad I did it.
Buster Brown pony. See this?
There's just so much that you need to live on.
Did you grow up feeling that way?
I think so, because my parents and my grandparents were real service-oriented people. When my dad retired, he said to me, I spend 95% of my day doing things for others. And I also remember being in New York with my dad, and he would walk along the sidewalks, and you know there are a lot of exposed windowsills on the sidewalks in New York, and he would put pennies. He would just place pennies on the windowsills. And I said, why do you do that? And he said, I just like to think about the people who will find them.
The town Fred Rogers grew up in was
Wow.
Latrobe, Pennsylvania.
That is a story. Let me hear that one more time.
He
Sorry.
would put pennies. He would just place pennies on
Just
the
on the window.
windowsills. And I said, why do you do that? And he said, I just like to think about the people who will find
Oh,
them.
interesting.
The town Fred Rogers grew up in was Latrobe,
Wow.
Pennsylvania.
See where he gets
was
it
an
from.
only child for many years and has said he was often lonely. But he had his parents and he had his grandparents, and they loved music.
And of course,
What
my
kind of music?
grandfather McFeely, you know, he played the violin, and I'm sure that's where I get some of my love for music. Even
you must
when I
do.
was 5 years old, I could go to the piano and be so
Wow.
either so sad
That was elegant.
or so happy. You know?
You could do that at the age of 5?
Yeah, I mean, not exactly like this, but I could really cry through the tips of my fingers when I was a kid.
It definitely does seem like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, as much as that was therapeutic and reassuring and comforting for a lot of people that watched it. I wasn't one of them, unfortunately. But it's to say, it definitely seemed like something for him itself was like therapeutic. That it was a way he could also release his emotions, or at least you see that influence from his younger childhood of how his parents were like very of service, and how the influence of his grandparents and the music. You can definitely see some of the cornerstones being set from a young age, which to watch influence something like a Mr. Rogers, and how even the fact that he was the only child, how that could have influenced as well, feeling lonely. Like he could definitely personally probably relate to a lot of the struggles and remember them vividly that he may have had when he was younger, and why he's able to touch and connect to so many other people at a young age, because he's really just tapping into that younger version of himself that he probably wishes he had, or that he probably is being that person that he wishes he had when he was young. But instead he's that person for other people. It's just, you know, I find it so fascinating when you kind of see someone's like upbringing and their childhood, and you see the things that they're successful for and later on in their lives, and you really like it really like lets you see kind of the building blocks that led to, you know, the big moment, like the creation of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and why someone like Mr. Rogers and the principles that he had allowed for it to resonate so deeply and go as far as it did, because you would have needed someone just like him to be the host or something like that. Something to think about.
Like this, but I could really cry through the tips of my fingers when I was a kid.
Rogers wrote all the songs he sang on The Neighborhood. He wrote all the scripts. He did most of the puppetry himself.
Over
He did
the
most of
years,
it, yeah.
has the program in your mind ever been an antidote to everything else that's on television, or to things that are going on in America, especially in childhood America. Have you ever thought of it as the refuge for kids?
That's
I've
a good way
always
of
thought of
putting it.
myself as a neighbor, an uncle that came to visit and just said, hey, let's spend a half an hour together, you know. I accept you exactly as you are. Let's just have some time together. But to think of it as an antidote to other things, you can't help but do that when you read some of the mail. And especially now, when people in their 30s are writing to say, you know, yours was the haven that I felt in my childhood.
In the
I
30s.
didn't know that people treated other people that nice. But I had a letter the other day saying that this woman had been abused and as a young child.
Ooh.
And she would find her solace in going into a little room that had the television. And she said, I really believed it when you said that people could like me exactly as I was.
Wow.
Because I really didn't like myself that much at first. But I really came to believe you.
That is so powerful.
To me, that's a holy enterprise. That the space between the television set and that little girl who was in such desperate need, the space there was holy ground.
Yeah, God works in
Something
mysterious
was
ways.
happening that wasn't in my control. I was just saying what was in my heart, and between that moment and her receiving it was, I think, a mysterious wonder.
Yeah, that's a powerful story, and that's the first time I've ever heard of that. Especially where he's talking about a literal example of a girl who got R-word, and you can imagine that trauma that would have done for anyone that goes through anything. That's a traumatic experience, and you can just see just how pivotal a Mr. Rogers neighborhood would be for many individuals, especially kids around who have had stuff like that happen to them. Especially nowadays when you're hearing all these stories going on of Hollywood and, do you know what I mean? And there's like scandal after scandal of some diss with a child or whatever. Like, I don't know what is going on these days. You know, I feel like we're in the last days of this thing. People are just, I'm hearing stories left, right, center. Maybe that's just the side of the internet I'm on. I don't know if you guys feel the same way, but yeah, like I said, to have a Mr. Rogers there, I definitely think God had his hand on him, and you can see the impact that he had, because that's a spiritual impact right there, man. What he did, what he was saying, who would have thought that what he said on whichever episode that girl would have watched would have touched her soul in such a way that helped her get through a traumatic experience. That's crazy. But it doesn't surprise me, man. When you look at the fruits of this show, it makes sense.
I guess you're wondering what might be in the big box. Well,
in 1969, much younger and still not well known, Mr. Rogers went to Washington. Public television needed more money. Congress was saying, no way.
Yeah,
The
this is a big
legendarily
moment.
tough Senator John Pastore had never even heard of this gentleman from Pittsburgh until now.
I give an expression of care
That was his
every
first
day
impression
to
of
each
Mr. Rogers.
child to help him realize that he is unique. I end the program by saying, you've made this day a special day by just your being you. There's no person in the whole world like you, and I like you just the way you are.
I think it's wonderful.
Yeah, he was.
Looks like you just earned the $20 million.
And that is another rare thing about Fred Rogers. He is a man who has made his mark while speaking consistently and passionately in soft tones.
Yeah, facts. Do you know, I wonder if, the Mr. Pastore guy that was just like, what's the word? Like, very much, like, first impressed with Mr. Rogers, and he was bewildered by what he said, and he was just so, like, persuaded. to just continue it and give the money. So considering how he had like a stigma of being like strict, I think it just goes to like, imagine, I wonder what was going through his head. Like, I wonder if it was maybe a part of him when Mr. Rogers was saying what he said in that tone of his, must have just touched his soul in a way that maybe could have reminded him of his own childhood. And he would have thought, like, I love this and I'd want something like this. You know what I'm saying? That's why he had such a heartwarming, warm reaction to Mr. Rogers saying what he said. But I don't know, food for thought, man. I wonder what was going. I wonder what you guys think was going through his head in that moment. Why he said yes like that. If it was deeper than just.
Are the producers and purveyors of television
Mr. Rogers
are servants of the people, and if those who sponsor programs and those who sit on boards of directors of places that own networks, if they would simply watch what's on a lot of their air and say to themselves, do I want my family watching this?
That's rude.
I think that the climate would change.
A lot of them would not want their family
and
watching.
The landscape of television could be what it's meant to be, and that is a landscape of nourishment for the human family.
So why then, after 34 years, is Mr. Rogers hanging up his sweater? Well, actually, he is not. Rogers says his goal all along was to create a library of episodes that would cover all the major issues of child development, and now he has done that. His staff, organized as what is called Family Communications, continues work on other projects, including, they hope, some new uses of the internet.
I have an idea of doing programs for people as they're going to sleep. You know, I would be able to read stories and the children would be able to see the books right on the computer.
That's an idea.
And I don't know another voice in America that could put people to sleep.
Right. Hey, that's a subtle flex, but he's got a point.
And then it was time to wrap up, and our cameraman, Danny, just had to ask Mr. Rogers for a snapshot. He said he'd filmed presidents before, but he had never asked for this favor before. And then everybody else took a picture, too. And then I asked for a first-time favor as well. Could Mr. Rogers just look into the camera and say hello to my son, Ben, and my daughter, Noah? Just a hello.
Hello, Ben. Hi, Noah.
Well, Mr. Rogers ran with it. He said hello, and he told them some more stuff about our day together. And then he did them a song.
To get home to you real soon. It's such a good feeling to know you're alive.
And all I could think as I realized how Mr. Rogers had just helped make me a hero to my own kids was, this guy on the piano is cool.
He is
very, very cool.
Very cool.
New day.
I'm John Donvan for Nightline in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood.
Very good feeling.
Hey, that is probably the best.
You know that we're friends.
Yeah, that's probably the best gift that I could get for their child, especially at that time. Shout out to those kids, man. They were very lucky kids to get a personalized message from Mr. Rogers. But in many ways, I guess every Mr. Rogers episode was a personalized message, because like in his head, right, like Mr. Rogers has said in previous videos I've checked out, that in his head he was talking to the one person. Even though thousands, millions of people have maybe seen Mr. Rogers, he was thinking of that one person in his head, and that was his goal. That one kid that he could help, that he could potentially, influence in a positive way from one of his episodes. That's all that mattered, right? And I think, especially with this title of what this guy's titled it, right? Mr. Rogers, cool dude. And, we saw a little bit of that theme of, especially what was going on during the time, and Mr. Rogers kind of contradicting that, as well as maybe he wasn't seen as cool, like, program to watch, but a very important and pivotal one. And when you look at what is considered cool nowadays, what I'm trying to say is I think a lot of the things that are considered cool nowadays are things that tend to be detrimental to the soul in many ways. Whether that is cool music, I mean, we see what rises to the top these days. Whether that's cool programs, whether it's cool to, go out and do certain activities and watch certain websites, and that's cool. right? I mean, at least that's what people say. But then when you look at the effects of a lot of those cool things, broken people, trauma, a lot of decisions that people probably wish they didn't make, that stuff. Whereas when you look at someone like Mr. Rogers, who isn't deemed as cool, but you look at the impact he's having, but people aren't talking about stuff like that, or people are saying that he's not cool, or he's boring, or what. I feel like people are very quick to call the things that are probably good for you, like the healthy things, bad, but they're very also quick to call the things that are bad for you good. I wonder what you guys think about that, man, because I definitely think we see a lot of that, especially considering how times have changed since rest in peace to how he to when he passed. I think that's even more true to this day. That's literally a man with a Bible quote right there. Hey, ain't that the truth, man? Look, if you made this to this point, comment down a red heart so I know who my ones are, and let me know what you thought of this reaction. This was quite a bit of a longer one. I'd love to know how you guys interacted with this. Have you seen this interview before? This is my first time checking it out, and if so, how did this impact you? And considering the stuff that was brought up in this video, a lot of these things, do you think things are you would agree with, or do you think things that were said in this you may disagree with? I'd love to know how this one impacts you guys, like I always do. Get in my comment section below. Let's get a conversation going. And of course, guys, as always, look, if you want to see more of these Mr. Rogers reactions, like I said at the beginning, I've got a place links at the end of the video. If you miss this point, don't forget to like the video, of course. I know it's easy to forget. And yeah, guys, look, if I hope I see you guys in another video, but if not, I've been the boy JayFlex, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.